Going east, Hong Kong's Securities and Futures Commission, the SFC, is proposing rules for virtual asset trading platforms and is seeking public comment, an effort to regain its former status as the world's crypto hub. Emily, what's going on in Hong Kong?
Yeah, we're hearing a lot about Hong Kong recently, and we're also hearing, some people in the U.S. talking about the return of Asia. Brian Armstrong was tweeting about it. One of the Winklevoss twins was tweeting about it. So basically, what's happening in Hong Kong is setting up a licensing regime for crypto service providers. There's been a lot of news from Hong Kong in recent days. We've also heard that they're earmarking millions of dollars for developing Web3. They have a task force dedicated to the development of virtual assets. They're looking to regulate stablecoins. So this has led to a lot of talk about the resurgence of Hong Kong as a crypto hub, and also, raises some questions about what this means for mainland China, which, has been famously strict on cracking down on cryptocurrency, but now looks like they at least are tacitly approving of these moves from Hong Kong.
I guess the next question is why? If they've been so strict in mainland China, why are they okay with Hong Kong experimenting in this, given that it seems that mainland China's policy is to be is eventually a convergence of regulations rather than a divergence?
Because I think it makes sense from the from Beijing's perspective to do this, and there's actually a certain logic here. Because I think we've sort of seen some signs over recent months that China does not want to be completely left out of crypto, and it does not want to be completely left out of sort of blockchain development. What they don't want is like an enormous number of ordinary, unsophisticated investors in mainland China, putting all their money into scammy ICOs and then, losing all their money and then going to the streets and protesting. That's what they don't want, right? But having crypto being sort of like in a very regulated environment in Hong Kong, it's not necessarily affecting like the man on the street in Beijing or Shanghai. I think this is a solution that kind of makes sense for China. And we've seen some signs over the past months. There was one interesting thing that happened. There was basically a former Chinese central bank official who sort of said exactly this publicly, who said that China might need to rethink some of its policies because it doesn't want to get left out of crypto. So I think this is a way for mainland China to kind of be involved, but not like super directly involved.
It's interesting you say that, because Chinese officials were spotted at crypto events in Hong Kong as the region prepares for a consultation process to eventually legalize a form of retail crypto trading in the territory, according to a Bloomberg report. What can you tell us about that?
Yeah, so that was a Bloomberg report, and it's like on the surface, it's like, okay, basically there were some mainland China representatives who showed up at some crypto events in Hong Kong, it seems like, and on the surface that might be like, okay, what's the big deal? But because with these kinds of things, it can be a little bit opaque. You have to look at signals like that, and the signals are okay. Like there seems to be at least some degree of mainland Chinese, if not approval, but at least acceptance of what's happening in Hong Kong, because a lot is happening in Hong Kong. Clearly they know about it, and clearly they are not directly opposing it. So I think that's what that signaling means.
Okay, so it's interesting because in the United States, we're seeing a lot of regulatory clampdowns, enforcement actions against crypto companies by the SEC and other regulators. And are we seeing in Asia, Hong Kong specifically, potentially mainland China coming around to crypto? And maybe you could explain that dichotomy.
Yeah, it's such a good question. So here's the thing to understand about Hong Kong. This doesn't mean that it's going to be like super easy to trade crypto in Hong Kong. Like not at all. Like Hong Kong's licensing regime, like we don't know that many of the details about it. But for example, there's been a lot of excitement about Hong Kong potentially allowing retail trading on centralized exchanges, but their rules are going to be really strict. I mean, I think that's something they're making very clear. It's not that different from Japan, which has like very sophisticated regulations, but they're also really, really strict. The difference between Hong Kong and the US isn't that, Hong Kong is sort of more chill about it. The difference is that Hong Kong is like actually taking the time to put a regulatory framework in place, whereas the US is kind of doing this whack-a-mole thing where the SEC sort of decides, okay, we don't like that project, we don't like that project, and sort of go after them after the fact. And that's why there's been so much criticism of the SEC's regulatory by enforcement approach, because it's seen as kind of like, hard to understand, a little bit random, So I think that's the big difference. It's kind of like establishing a regulatory framework, establishing what's known as regulatory clarity, which would probably attract more projects to the region because a lot of people are very confused about what's going on in the United States.
So what does this mean for people, investors in mainland China who want to get involved in crypto and they look at Hong Kong? How hard is it for them ultimately? Will it be for them to go to Hong Kong or at least, stay home and send money to Hong Kong to trade? Is it still going? Do we have any idea of the restrictions that will be faced by the everyday average Chinese person and wanting to trade there?
So here's the thing about crypto in China. Basically, this whole time, with all the Chinese bans, if you wanted to trade crypto in China, if you were determined to do it, there were ways to do it. That's been true basically this whole time, right? And I don't think it was ever Beijing's attempt to clamp down on crypto entirely. I don't think they care that much if there's like a relatively small group of people trading crypto, right? So yeah, but with Hong Kong, with these sort of new rules, yeah, I think it will just become easier. For example, people in mainland China could find ways to open up a Hong Kong bank account. Obviously, they're very close, people could potentially relocate to Hong Kong, relocate to Shenzhen. One of the interesting trends we've seen with the China's clamping down is that a lot of these sort of Chinese projects have moved to Singapore to avoid the Chinese crackdown. And I think we could start seeing some of those coming to Hong Kong because they're complaining that, Singapore is expensive or, Hong Kong's obviously closer. Hong Kong is close to sort of Chinese development communities. So I do think that this will open up a bridge to sort of mainland Chinese crypto entrepreneurs, investors, traders. I think that's a big part of the story.
We've been hearing in the markets lately a lot of people tying the recent rally in the crypto markets to the buzz in Hong Kong and Asia in general, and a lot of, waking up in that region. Do you feel that is the case?
Well, Christine, as you know very well, if you ask 10 people what's driving up Bitcoin's price, they're going to give you 10 different answers, right? So, but I think probably the waking up that is most relevant to the story isn't necessarily crypto regulation. It's more the fact that Hong Kong, China have had very, very strict COVID restrictions. Mainland China particularly, and now we're finally seeing the opening up. And obviously those COVID restrictions had a huge impact on the Chinese economy and consumption. So I think that's probably the waking up they're referring to. And, maybe there's some sort of linkage, but I don't think it's about crypto regulation specifically.